Hello and welcome back to the channel. So today is June 15th, which is 1 week before Tesla is rumored to start their ROBOTAXI service in Austin on June 22nd, as per one of Elon's tweets recently. Those timelines might be pushed back, but it's interesting to understand the current competitive landscape of ROBOTAXI. So these are cars that are driven by AI and no human driver in the car, and normal Ubers and Lyfts that you can get around the world. So today we'll be going through those different pricing insights, but also in this report you'll have survey information about customer preferences and concerns around autonomous vehicles and many other factors around different opinions by age, pricing dynamics, price elasticity dynamics, which I all think is quite interesting. So in a previous video, I talked about Tesla's approach to robotaxis and Waymo's approach to robotaxis. So Waymo in this example is Google's self-driving car and robotaxi project that is currently live today. And that is the robotaxi that we will be comparing in this report, as Tesla is not yet launched. And we don't know the pricing dynamics that they will introduce just yet. So though Tesla's approach may be different to Waymo's, and it'll be very interesting to see how that all plays out. But let's get straight into it now. So first, I wanted to go through the pricing dynamics. So the number one takeaway that actually surprised me is that Waymo's actually cost 41% more than Lyft and 31% more than Uber on average when comparing pricing at the same time and across the same routes. So this really surprised me, because the premise of robotaxis or autonomous vehicles is that when you take the driver out of the car and you're driven by AI, it should reduce the cost of a robotaxi. The robotaxi should be cheaper on average than an Uber or Lyft, because the main cost for Uber and Lyft is the driver, the timing, the driver's time. You have to pay for that labor time. So it's very interesting to see that Waymo is able to charge more than Uber and Lyft. And I think this is comes down to a lot of things we talked about in the previous video around how Waymo has very high fixed costs. They have very high operating costs. And as a result, they may have less pricing power in the market. But as you may see here, right now they are supply limited. So it could just be that they are trying to maximize the revenue and therefore earnings per vehicle per ride as they seek a path to profitability. And if they can charge that price and there is demand that occupies the majority of their fleet at these high prices, they have no incentive to reduce prices, as they will not be able to service that kind of demand anyway. So as with all ride-hail apps, they have a pricing model with surge pricing depending on supply and demand at different times. And this is how Uber has worked for years. So again, Waymo is between 30 to 40% more expensive than Uber and Lyft on the same routes. Really surprising to me. But actually, when you get into some of the reasons why, it actually quite makes sense in the end. So here's a really key table that I wanted to focus on. So this is the average range in terms of the price per kilometer. I know people talk about price per mile a lot, but these are really high numbers. If you think about this, the average price per kilometer is $14.44 for Lyft, the cheapest provider, and $20 for Waymo. In the previous video, we were talking about some of the predictions around what the cost per mile, what the price per mile could be, and we were talking about $1 price per mile, which is in this case would be $1.60 price per kilometer. So you can kind of almost think about adding Tesla at the bottom, going $1.50, $2, something like that. This is an incredibly high cost to consumers for ride-hail, and this shows you the kind of the opportunity for disruption there is in this market currently. Because if you can charge a tenth and let me repeat that, a tenth of the price per kilometer. This is price per kilometer, not total price of the ride. This is price per kilometer of the ride. Then you have significant opportunity to increase the demand, as if you make the rides cheaper. And sorry, maybe this is the better numbers to look at. So not 20, but maybe $11.22. So still significantly higher than the $1.50, $2 that we were considering in a previous video. So that is the opportunity. If the price per kilometer reduces, let's say 5x versus this example, that will massively increase the demand for these services. If we look at my example, most people's examples here, you're much more likely to take an Uber or a Lyft or a Waymo or a Tesla ROBOTAXI if the price is 20% of what it is today. If the price per kilometer is $2 or $1.50 compared to this, you're more likely to use this rather than public transport, maybe even one day buying a second car or something like that. And so I think this is a really key table. And again, Waymo is more expensive, far more expensive, average price per kilometer at this point of time. So this is another interesting graph, but I think it shows you that the price per kilometer is much higher in the shorter rides. So because of the time it takes for the car to come to you, so the dead miles, that's like where the provider does not get any revenue from driving those miles to come to pick you up, is what increases the cost so significantly in this initial bucket here. And as you go down, the price goes down because those dead miles as a percentage of cost for the entire trip go down. So that's kind of explaining the trend here. But again, in each bucket, Waymo is more expensive. So that trend continues in every single situation. Yep. So I kind of just repeats a similar way of that. And then here, so again, this is what we talked about previously with surge pricing. So because these companies are supply limited, there's less supply relative to demand at these peak prices, peak hours. And you can see here that Waymo really has that post-work 4 to 6 p.m. timeline where they really have constrained supply, and so they have to increase prices, but also there is still demand at these prices. And again, this is a constrained supply. So one of the key debates when you're launching an autonomous vehicles service, and especially when you're thinking from a Tesla perspective, when you have the potential to really saturate demand, do you plan for peak demand? So do you have enough vehicles to satisfy peak demand, which then means you have a lot of the time in these less peak hours we have lots of idle vehicles not doing anything? So do you build to peak demand, or do you build to kind of the average demand that you see, and then have that surge pricing at the peak? So it's about the efficiency of use of that fleet. But then the argument could be that if you build for peak, can those additional cars that you have on the road, additional robotaxis you have on the road, could they have a different use in these less peak hours? Could they be used for, I don't know, food delivery, like Uber Eats or something like that? Could they be used for, smaller package deliveries, things like that, like UPS or something like that? Could they be used as mini energy storage locations? Could they be used as, because they've got a massive battery, could they be used as, distributed inference because they've got an inference chip in the car? And this is all things that that's been discussed on earnings calls. Could you build for capacity, and therefore you have low price per mile at every hour of the day, and then when you have too many vehicles versus demand, then can those cars have other utility, other purpose that they use? And then who knows, if you have more vehicles, you can drive down the price per mile even further, and then create even more demand by driving that price and having that price elasticity as well. And then you have a lot more cars that you need to use before you get to saturation. So to recap, Waymo is still by far the most expensive provider, which was surprising. And this is consistent across almost all distances of ride and time of day. But Waymo has the most extreme price increases in that time, potentially due to limited supply constraint. Okay. So next I wanted to go through, so here are the key insights as we mentioned before, and I want to really bring attention to the competitive positioning. So Waymo's pricing algorithm appears more sensitive to peak demand than competitors. And again, as I mentioned before, I think this is because they have limited cars on the road. They have 1,500 cars across 5 cities. They just do not have the amount of supply to meet that peak demand, and therefore have to have a more aggressive surge pricing model relative to competitors like Uber, who can just pay drivers more and therefore have that supply, have flexible supply essentially. So the consistent premium suggests a business strategy focused on higher margins rather than volume. And again, this is because of the high capital requirements that Waymo has to invest to put these cars on the road. They have massive cost associated with them. They're maybe $150,000 per car, and we still don't know if they are loss making or not, because they have also maintenance and things like that. As a result, they have constrained supply for now, and so they have to make the most of the vehicles that they have, and therefore they have a higher price per mile at the moment. And again, as I mentioned, different approaches to surge pricing, potentially driven by supply dynamics. Cool. And now this is another really interesting piece. So ETA, obviously the time it takes to pick up a customer, is also a very important part of the entire customer experience, right? Customers want lower prices, they want lower wait times, things like that. And then again, from the fewer cars perspective, Waymo, due to fewer cars, can have significantly longer ETAs, as well as higher prices and peak hours. Again, the supply limitation of Waymo is making it a very different data piece in this puzzle, because they are autonomous vehicles, but are supply constrained autonomous vehicles. And the real question will be, what will the report look like when we add on Tesla to the mix? And maybe they are not as supply constrained. Maybe they go to Austin and they rapidly scale up after the initial testing phase, from 10 to 20 initially to hundreds in a few weeks, maybe a few months, and then maybe 1,000 or 2,000 by the end of the year, early next year. And with that many cars, you saturate the entirety of Austin, and maybe you take away all the market share from Uber, Lyft, and Waymo, because you're more competitive in price. And so, does the lack of supply limited autonomous vehicles completely gut the market and have a winner take most market share? That's a really interesting question, because right now, based on what this is showing me, is that Waymo can charge higher prices despite longer ETAs. And the reason for that may be that customers just prefer autonomous vehicles, and we'll get onto that in a second. So, Waymo has the widest range because of supply constraint. Okay. And yes, this is the key insights that I wanted to go through quickly. So as mentioned, Waymo's pricing is primarily supply driven, ETA being the main factor explaining price adjustments, and therefore there's lack of vehicle availability, and therefore each vehicle has to cover more distance to reach customers because of the lack of supply. And in peak hours, it's almost always a positive correlation between ETA and price. I mean, the longer you have to wait, the more you have to pay. And this is counterintuitive because the longer you have to wait, you might think it's worse customer experience, but because peak demand, customers are willing to wait and pay more because of the surge pricing model that we see the robotaxis based on ride-hail price elasticity in peak demand. And again, due to the cost of sending a car to a consumer's pickup location. Yeah, and safety may be a concern at night, as news reports suggest. Cars may have more trouble in low light environments, so that might explain a little bit why Waymo's peak at night is different and more aggressive, because they have even fewer cars than they otherwise would have. So moving on to price elasticity. So as I mentioned before, with Waymo and Uber and Lyft, it's not just interesting a question on the price elasticity front at the moment, because Waymo is priced higher, right? The really important question that is still quite unknown is what the price elasticity will be when we have much cheaper price per mile autonomous vehicles offerings when they're not supply constrained. So, for example, if Tesla comes in and charges, the $2, $1 per mile price, what will be the demand increase as a result of that? There was a report by Uber that said that if you can offer rides for $1 per mile versus the current pricing, the demand 20x's. So the TAM, total addressable market, 20x's. That is still unknown because we don't have many providers or any providers right now that charge $1 per mile in the Western marketplaces like the US and Europe. Maybe that's kind of true in India, China, those kind of regions. But then again, we don't know the demand profile of what will happen to ride-hail demand if those kind of prices appeared in the US market. Well, the one thing I would like to point out here is essentially that Waymo shows a highest elasticity in the afternoon. Every 10% increase in ETA, consumer will have to pay 4.1% more. And I think this is really the key point of how low cost, unconstrained supply AVs can really change the nature of the ride-hail market. What happens when the cost is low, cheap, and the ETAs are also low when you have more supply saturation? And this makes sense for the provider or the fleet manager if they can find other uses for those overbuilt capacity. So that can be a really massive disruption to the entire industry. And I think this is how move on to the main part of this report, which is the attitudes on AVs, autonomous vehicles. What do consumers perceive about autonomous vehicles versus normal ride-hail? Now, a key note is that the initial data we will look at is all respondents, those who have taken a Waymo and those who haven't taken a Waymo. The nature of these AVs will also be different based on the different provider, but let's just take this as face value for now. So, age, gender, and state of origin significantly impact attitudes towards AVs and rideshare. I think age and gender are really the most interesting for me, because there's actually a significant difference in with these two variables. One example you can see, we found that men are more trusting of autonomous vehicles than women. 48% of men versus 34% of women saying they would trust Waymo to transport their children. A significant, meaningful difference. 65% would trust Waymo to transport an elderly relative, compared to 45% of women. Significant differences. 38.5% versus 16% of women have already travelled in a Waymo. So that shows you the gender gap is real in AVs, and what's still unknown is will this change over time as more people get experience in riding AVs? Is it about risk aversion? Is more data required? Is more experience required? Will it need time to normalize? And then for age as well, the older you are, it seems like the less likely you are to take an autonomous vehicle, or less open you are to new technology. So younger adults didn't experience strong preference, reflected more worry, and those over 60 reflected more worries about technology. But this is the really key point. This is the really key point. This was for all users who had taken or had not taken. But for users that have taken a Waymo ride or an AV ride or a ROBOTAXI ride, a whopping 70% said they would prefer a driverless car to a traditional rideshare taxi with a driver. 70%. That is significant. And that's really the key takeaway, I would say, from this entire thing. There is a significant percentage of those who have tried a driverless car who prefer it to other human-driven cars. And that kind of also goes to why they may be willing to pay more for the service. So let's go on to some of these questions. So how comfortable do you feel riding in autonomous driverless ride-sharing Waymo? So again, this is all respondents. And you can see that 60% are kind of open to it. Around 40% here are somewhat uncomfortable or very uncomfortable. And again, these are likely to change once they've experienced the ride. So as you said, 70% preferred after they tried it. So this is maybe an overestimate of those that are very uncomfortable or somewhat uncomfortable. And again, we talked about the gender gap here. Many of these will be women versus men on average. But then again, around 40% here, say 35, are somewhat comfortable. So that's already a significant amount, and we are really early stage. We are really early in this industry. There's only 1,500 Waymos in the world. Let me say that again. There are only 1,500 Waymos fleet size in the United States right now operating, and that's the only autonomous vehicle player in the market. We are so early with autonomous vehicles, and we still have 40% roughly who are okay with it, or 60% that are comfortable to neutral. That's a massive opportunity for such an early adoption curve. So this is rehashing the 70% of users prefer Waymo if they've used it. And now this is an interesting part. So only 31% of users believe that Waymo will be safer than human driver in the next 5 years. So this is, again, I think some of this comes from lack of understanding, because Waymo's data kind of already shows that they are already safer than humans. If you look at the average US driver versus Waymo's safety numbers in terms of the number of crashes, I think the number they keep quoting is 80% safer on all metrics related to safety: number of crashes, number of accidents, or in general. So we're already safer than human. So this is just perception of people, and it's not even next 5 years. It's already there, and Tesla will get there very soon as well, if the data is to be believed. Now, would you pay more? Obviously, customers never want to pay more, but there are actually a non-negligible number of percentage of people, who would be willing to pay more. So, yes, up to $5. Yes, up to 10. Yes, up to 5. So that's 32, 42. 42% are willing to pay more for an autonomous vehicle. And we'll get into why in a second, but you can understand some of the basic things would be, safety, privacy, know when to talk to in the car, no need to tip, you can choose your own music, you have a lot of autonomy in that way. And again, do you see Waymo driverless car becoming a main rideshare in the near future? Too early to say. 40% say no, 25% yes, say yes. I think people don't really understand how quickly this can change. If you look at Waymo scaling, they've been scaling very, very slowly over the past couple of years. They only have a fleet size of 1,500 vehicles, and they started in 2009, and they started launching paid rides in 2020. So that's 5 years ago. 5 years of them being on the roads, and it's only been a fleet size of 1,500 vehicles. So that's kind of what people may be thinking about. As well, in terms of main rideshare, again, it's more expensive as well, not available everywhere. The Waymos are also geo-fenced, they can't access everywhere, they can't access the airport yet, they can't access highways. So a lot of these variables come into this question as well. Do you think driverless rides should have a remote human operator monitoring the ride? So many of them will have some sort of remote operator in case it gets stuck, but we don't know the ratio as of yet. Would it be 1 to 1? Unlikely, because then it would not be really any different than how you're driving the car in terms of the cost piece of it. Most likely it will be initially 1 to 5 cars, one operator to 5 cars, but eventually when you're having 99.999% efficacy, you may have a situation where there's one remote operator per 1,000 robotaxis, because it's unlikely that they'll have multiple robotaxis needing help at the same time if you get to that march of nines in terms of safety. And again, many of these interventions will be not safety critical. So there will be things like it's stuck, doesn't know what to do next kind of thing, not it's about to crash kind of thing. In a crash situation, a remote operator probably will not be able to react faster than the car anyway. So this is more about when it gets stuck, is my view. So okay, this I love this this survey question. What's your biggest issue with ride shares in 2020? By a wide margin, it is price. And this is kind of what I've been saying the entire time, which is when you have a low cost option, demand will skyrocket. We don't know how much by, depends on how much the price falls, but price is still the number one issue. Rideshare is very, very expensive still, and actually has gotten more expensive in recent years because Uber has become more of a market dominant player, and so they can price accordingly as well. And again, Waymo is also becoming more premium rather than what the AVs are promising, which is lower cost. The wait times are too long, and again, Tesla is probably going to be actioning this. They've said in the past, I think in the past that 50 cents per mile to 35 cents per mile in the long term, cheaper than a bus ticket in terms of price per mile in the long term of robotaxi. So this is one of the biggest opportunities in the market. Then wait times too long. I've talked about this as well. This is about supply constrained or versus constrained supply. So if you have the ability, like a Tesla, to manufacture hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of these cars every year, the Tesla's installed capacity right now is roughly 2 million vehicles a year. They can produce that much capacity across all their factories globally. If you can produce 2 million cars every year, each of them with robotaxi potential, because they have all the hardware systems, they can massively oversupply different regions and really cut down this wait time. So they can have a lower price with lower wait times, further increasing demand. Safety, and again, the exponential rate of how much AI is improving with the amount of data that they're collecting and how much the scaling laws you seem to be holding when you throw more compute, more data at these training, these systems, these models. This will also become far safer than human very, very quickly. Drivers cancel me too often. Not going to be a problem with robotaxis because there is no driver, right? You book a taxi, it will come to you no matter what, based on supply and demand of those taxis rather than a driver making that decision. Too many apps is not a big concern, but it also shows you that this might be a commodity piece, which is customers are not brand loyal generally in a robotaxi. They want to get from A to B, unless you know that some app has a very, very poor customer experience. So I don't see this as a blocker to Tesla, for example, or Waymo. There's a lot of debate about will Uber win autonomous vehicles by partnerships and using their network effects from their app. And there's another party that says if you have your own app and you have lower prices, customers will download your app and pay and to get the lower price. So that's still, again, something that we'll have to see. Yeah, so I think those are the main points, right? It's prices, wait time, and safety are the three main things. And I think unconstrained supply of robotaxis solves all three. And this is really what Tesla is. This is what the opportunity Tesla is looking at. So this is another interesting one. Why do you prefer Waymo driverless car? So why do you prefer robotaxis over normal ride hail, like with a human driver in it? So enjoying new technology is by far the most highest response. So um, people are, maybe willing to try it. It's exciting to try a robotaxi. It's like a theme park ride, but this normal factor will go away. So let's kind of discount that. But it shows that people are willing to give it a chance. But then, don't have to talk to a driver. Over half the respondents. Driverless cars are better quality, so maybe they're cleaner because they're maintained by a fleet operator or something like that. Maybe they are nicer cars, more consistent because you know what you're going to expect. With Uber, you don't know what car you're going to get when you book. Only once the booking has been done, you know what car you're going to get. But if you book through a Waymo or a Tesla, you know you're going to get a Waymo, which is the same. Every single car is the same in the fleet. Same with Tesla will be very similar. Every car will be the same or very, very similar. You're going to order a Model Y, it's going to be a Model Y. Cybercab will be Cybercab. You know what you're going to get. Better for the environment, these will be electric, most likely because of electric cars are lower cost of maintenance, lower total cost of ownership, that kind of thing. So for fleet operators of autonomous vehicles, it's really important to be electric because of the number of miles you're driving. And I don't have to leave a tip, again, it comes down to price. So again, autonomous electric vehicles will solve all of these issues as well. Biggest concerns. Okay, so safety, technological failure, hacking, which again is kind of linked to safety and tech failure, cost, and jobless drivers, privacy. Very few don't have any concerns. But as I mentioned before, safety is a concern I think will get solved quite quickly, but it is still an important factor right now, and you don't want to jeopardize customer trust with a high-profile accident early on. So robotaxi providers have to be very careful when they roll out, and have to be very careful when they expand. And that kind of comes to all three of these. And then cost, again, I've talked about in depth. They need to drive the cost down. Job loss of drivers, I think, will be really a concern. And privacy, we'll get back to this in a second because this is an interesting one in terms of who's taken versus has not taken a robotaxi. What situation would you consider using a driverless share for? So this is just kind of, it probably maps quite closely to how people use taxis for in general, right? But it's interesting because Waymo can't do airport travel yet. And late night rides. So this comes back to safety. Airport travel is maybe longer trips, so therefore the price per kilometer goes down as well. So, this is maybe a less interesting one, but it shows you the kind of best use cases. Again, trust right now. Many of these have not taken a robotaxi before. This may change. And these are very similar questions. So let's move on from this. Yes, this one, I love this one. This is the age variation in the survey. So let's take it by kind of age group. Or just take it by concern. So cost. So it looks like the 30 to 44-year-olds are much more concerned with the cost part than the younger and older generation. Very interesting to see big differences here. Hacking is more on the younger age. You can see a very clear trend. The older you are, the less risk you see from hacking. Maybe it's a less understanding of technology in general. That's quite ironic, I would say. No concerns is low across the board. Job loss for drivers, also quite consistent across the board, more so in the 60 plus category. Privacy is very interesting. So this is actually consistently up there and one of the top concerns for all age groups. And again, it kind of links youngest to oldest with the most concerns. So I think from this table you see that these top concerns are quite consistent across age groups, right? Safety, technological failure are the top ones for all of the age groups, same with privacy, hacking, and cost. So I don't think there's actually, looking at this, not actually that much variation in the end. Maybe variation within the age groups, within the different categories, but each category is roughly similar proportions. But again, it points towards the younger demographic being more comfortable in pretty much all of the safety related and privacy related safety related pieces, except for the hacking piece at the end. So over 31% of younger and older riders share fears of tech failures. But then here's an interesting piece. So this is those who have taken an Waymo, so who have taken an autonomous vehicle. These are all groups. So let's see if we can see the biggest differences. So what stands out to me is one, the privacy piece, which I mentioned before. Privacy becomes a bigger concern once you've taken a AV. You can see privacy concern jumped up to by 15% among individuals who've taken a Waymo. So maybe it's because the camera's in the car to monitor your behavior. That's a big concern that people may not have thought about before, but becomes very big after they've taken one. But then what also interests me is that safety and tech failure, or safety at least, goes down significantly once you've taken that Waymo. So it goes down by about 10%, like 1,000 bips kind of thing, across the board. Goes from 67.8 to 55.2. So people get more comfortable in the safety thing, which is again one of the most biggest concern for all respondents after they've taken a ride. So they're much more comfortable with safety after the ride. And I think similar for, I think people actually hacking might be consistent across the board. Cost, again, quite consistent. Job loss for drivers goes up for most categories. No concerns goes up a little bit as well. But I think the main takeaways are privacy is more of a concern after you've taken a ROBOTAXI. Safety goes down as a concern once you've taken a ROBOTAXI. So people will get more comfortable with the safety aspect over time. Privacy, different fleet manufacturers will need to be made decisions to make people feel more comfortable with them. Cool. And I think by state I'm not too. Let's move on to something else. Okay. So that's really the end of this report, and I think hopefully it gives you a better idea of the landscape, despite the fact that Waymo is still not pricing any cheaper than Waymo and an Uber and Lyft. But it's interesting because they have higher ETAs, higher prices, and they're taking market share. So here, I think they took this data from California and Arizona. In California and San Francisco, Waymo is now taking 25% share, and it's really digging into Uber and Lyft's market share now in San Francisco. So despite being more expensive and higher ETAs and longer ETAs, they are winning market share. And it really comes down to potentially here, don't have to talk to the driver, better quality, better environment, new technology. So yeah, hope that was an interesting look into this report, and I'll see you next time.